listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I am Bob Schlehuber.
And my name is Jamarl Thomas. Let's get ready to go against the grain. We have a barn burner of a show today. You know what today is. Super Tuesday, Super Duper Tuesday. I'm massively excited. We are massively excited on the show today. I'm going to be covering this later tonight. 14 states in America, Samoa, are going to the polls in order to pull the lever for the person they wish to exceed the Democratic primary. To say I am nervous about what could happen tonight is an understatement. Everything that we hold dear and true is on the line. In real terms, all the speculation and political jousting over the past year is going to come to a reckoning with large contours of the election's narrative going forward being decided tonight. We'll have a deep dive into predictions. Bob and I will go on the record without prognostications. We'll also be diving into the consolidation of the centrists and what this will mean going forward in the primary. In the second hour of the show, we'll be discussing the worrying events in Syria, with Turkey invoking NATO and weaponizing refugees, basically using the threat of millions of immigrants flooding into Europe as a means of compelling NATO to send military assistance. I don't need to tell you that this is dangerous. We'll also be going into strange economics around the coronavirus, followed by our weekly politics and arts segment. In a moment, we'll be opening the phone lines at 202-521-1320. That's 202-521-1320 if you would like to talk about Super Tuesday or anything else that's on your mind. But first, we have to discuss the massive news hitting the political space yesterday. The coalescing of the moderates around a dementia-riddled septuagenarian for the explicit reason of stopping Sanders. This feels a lot like John McCain choosing Sarah Palin while standing under a banner screaming country first. Pete Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar all jump out the race and immediately endorse Joe Biden.
And if you are tired of the extremes, you have a home with me. And I think you know you have a home with Joe Biden.
You have a home with Joe Biden. These endorsements were followed by endorsements with Harry Reid, Beto O'Rourke, all throwing their bodies into the nomination contest backing Biden. None of this was a coincidence. Reporting early on noted that if Sanders was running away with the contest, Obama would get involved. Well, the old man has got involved. NBC News is reporting that people close to Obama said the former president has been keeping close tabs on the race. They said the signal has been sent out in the past 36 hours that he sees Biden as a candidate to back, and they don't need Obama to say it publicly or privately. To be clear, the moderates have thrown their lot in with a man that on more than one occasion didn't know where he was, couldn't remember Obama's name, said blacks didn't know how to raise their kids, has spent a lifetime working without and out, singing in the daylight, running through the daisies races in order to either put black men in prison or hold back busing. This was the other day, the person they're backing, Joe Biden. Let's hear him.
We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men and women created by you know the thing.
All men and women are created by, what is that? What is that concept called? What is the thing? Oh, God. God. That's what he forgot. God. This goofball is the guy they're going to put up against Donald Trump, a sundowning septuagenarian that can't even remember just the basic term, God. Hillary was at least competent and coherent. Hillary 2.0, not so much. In addition to the basic coalescing around the moderates, the other important component of this strategy is Warren. Elizabeth Warren. I have been right on her from day one. For nearly a year, I've noted that Warren was a key player in the plan to stop Sanders. Like she said, I'm just a player in this game. She is just a player in this game indeed, but an important one. NBC News reported in 2019 that Warren and Clinton were working together behind the scenes, the same professional bitter person that routinely pulls her head from a dunghill in order to attack Sanders. This was the wife, of course, of Bill Clinton, the same Bill Clinton that reached his rape hand onto Tom Perez and told him this.
But this crisis is a reminder that this primary isn't a game. We are picking a president, and we need someone whose core values can be trusted, who has a plan for how to govern, and who can actually get it done.
Okay, that was a clip. That wasn't the exact clip. Let's try this one more time. Listen to Clinton telling Perez to not let Sanders people take the party.
Huge battle for the soul of the Democratic Party between the Clinton-type folks and the Sanders folks. And Tom Perez is in the middle of that, and he's gotten very explicit instructions from President Clinton, as we write in the paperback extension of the original book. He's gotten instructions from Bill Clinton not to let the party go to the Bernie Sanders folks.
Don't let the party go to Sanders folks. This is effectively what Tom Perez was told when he was shadily put in over Keith Ellison. With the contest of 2016, meaning, or my context of all of this was set in 2016. I consider her to be a creature of the party. She did, after all, back Clinton. She did, after all, refuse to come out for Standing Rock until Obama came out. Meaning, if you know that in 2016 there was a mission to stop Sanders, why would that mission change this time around? Basically, they understood that Sanders was going to run, and they needed something to slow him down and hit him in the knees and bring his numbers down, at the very least enough to exceed the primary. Warren, widely considered a lefty, fit this bill. She ran the race aping his policies, locked up support that would have otherwise gone to him, and when she coalesced, when her polling collapsed, and when her support collapsed, and she couldn't sandbag him effectively, which was the original plan, she became belligerent and just started to attack him. Let's hear the clip. Okay, well, basically, the clip we heard before talking about her core values, making the point that we need somebody with core values in order to run in this particular race. Let's be clear, Warren is going to lose every state, including her home state, at the very least, most likely even her home state, as it must be understood that the dark money super PAC that is pushing her and keeping her going is there, again, a way for oligarchs to give her support to keep her in the race to sandbag Sanders. People seem to be shocked by her behavior on this, but the key point and rationale is similar to 2016. She will be handsomely rewarded in the next administration if she can work with Bloomberg, Biden, Pete, Klobuchar, Pelosi, Schumer, and Obama to stifle a broad coalition of the working class putting their blood, sweat, and tears on the line to reinsole the Democratic Party into something that could materially benefit them, as opposed to just having a black face or Hispanic face or a gay person in a particular spot. How illustrative is it of the Democratic Party that they are so against health care, taxing the oligarchs, expanding education and Social Security? How illustrative is it that there is an oligarch that is literally in the race with the explicit interest of preventing that working class coalition from taking the party, to be so fervent in their religious devotion to being against Sanders that they are willing to put the party on the line in a brokered convention and shoving a sundowning man down their throat. Sanders, oh, Bernie Sanders, the things that prowl and holler are baring their teeth, they're unsheathing their claws, and they're licking their lips. You are surrounded by your enemies, sir. All of them have settled on a strategy to work together in tandem to stop you. This is in spite of 2016, where you went out and shucked and jived from state to state to state for Hillary Clinton in moments like this.
We have got to defeat Donald Trump. And we have got to elect Hillary Clinton and Tim Kaine.
Boo! Bow! Boo! Think about that. Think about that. Those are people that love him, that were still out there cheering for him when he's, doing his thing. And the moment he says vote for Hillary Clinton for like a minute, literally nearly a minute, they booed him, a cacophony of boos. And you, Sanders, stood there going from pillar to post, getting booed by your own people for trying to back and get Clinton elected. And what happens in this term when they asked Hillary Clinton about backing you? She wouldn't do so. Yeah, she eventually got shamed, but just be very clear that you went out there from state to state to state, including some states she wouldn't even go to, and they booed you for it, and she still wouldn't come out to support you on her own steam. You have an entirety of a party that is allied against you, a political space, media space, an economic space that is going to dump billions into stopping you. And yeah, people who you call your friends like Joe Biden and Elizabeth Warren are not. They are working in tandem to stop you. Now, the point here, and the reason why I'm going through all this, is because I want to make a plea to Sanders. Rip the chains off. Your weakness in this situation is a weakness that I've noted that going back for over a year. This strange ideological devotion to only talking about policy. Races are not always one on this notion of policy, and there's an ideological bend to this. Yes, in most circumstances, this is a strength. To go for 40 years and people seeing you pushing for the same topics, the same ideas, whether or not they're in vogue or not, that is a positive attribute. That is an amazing thing. That gets this level of authenticity that people are looking for and craving for, something that they can give that's a real thing. But keep in mind, advantages are not absolutes. Something that may be an advantage in one context may not necessarily be an advantage in the other. In this race, as opposed to going after Joe Biden for the civil rights stuff, you demurred. As opposed to creating a contrast between Warren, you demurred. Even when you're on stage and they would ask you something specifically to go against either Biden or to go against Warren or to create some level of contrast, you would not do so. And there were several opportunities where you had the opportunity to do this. My perspective on civil rights in politics has somewhat evolved ever since I've been working here at this particular office and had the opportunity to have conversations with people who have a different perspective on this than I am. I still believe that class is the most important thing, especially in the context between class and race. But I don't think that race is one of those things that can be ignored, especially in a political space. For me, Sanders' policies dramatically benefit the people at the bottom. But there's something to be said about Sanders being able to articulate that, and especially in the context of political warfare. Ultimately, if Joe Biden is going to get on stage and talk about his role in the civil rights movement, it behooves you. It is in your best interest. It is something that you should do to eviscerate him on that topic. Yes, I am making the point that not every conversation and every debate is entirely about policy. There are some debates that you have to show that the person is lying. This is no different than the Social Security thing where you could show Joe Biden was lying on Social Security and he collapsed in those states. This was no different than Warren being shown to be dishonest and disingenuous in her pushing for Medicare for all when really she was just putting a public option and she collapsed in those states. Meaning, if the issue is that you need to get votes, then you need to run this contest with the chains off. You need to win this. The feelings of the other people in the race, they are not your friends. They've never been your friends, especially in the context of party politics where they're doing everything in their powers to stop you. And yet, you still have this weird thing where you'll put a knife in Nina Turner in order to not bring up this issue of race when you're given this point of view, or not create the contrast with Warren in the way that she was taking money, or was going to take it, I won't unilaterally disarm and take the money in the primaries or in the general. I'm just making the very basic point, Sanders. You need to rip the chains off. These people are not your friends. And at this point, all of the political space is lined up against you. It behooves you as a representation of your supporters and representation of all the things that you want to get accomplished. Rip the chains off. Your ideology is a poor substitute for reality. Bob, what do you think about this? I mean, basically, I think he needs to get into his head that these people are not my friends. This race has gotten much, much closer. Nate Silver, at one point, Sanders was winning the delegate math by like 2-1. That number has gone to maybe just 200-point difference in regards to the estimated demographics. He does not seem to take certain opportunities. And that right now, with all of these people allied against him, he needs to take every opportunity he can get his hands on.
But he is who he is. I think you keep expecting him to do something that he's not. He's not going to speak. And this is the thing when it comes to race issues, when people have taken the same concerns to Bernie Sanders. And for me, we'll continue to talk about this issue of race versus class. If you take a poor white person and you say, we'll help you no longer be poor and address your economics, but that means also helping poor black people, I think a lot of poor white people is like, no, we're going to pass on that. And I think Bernie Sanders has been talked to, and people have said, look, you need to start understanding that race plays a major role in being able to address class issues.
Yes.
And Bernie Sanders gets that. He'll say it for a few stump speeches or few, but these people are doing 8-9 stump speeches a day, 8-9 interviews a day, talking to thousands of people all day, every day. When you get tired, you fall back on where you've always come from.
Yeah.
And for Bernie Sanders, that's not on race. And that's not breaking away from the restraints to go and attack. That's just not who he is. And as much as he needs to right now, he needs to do these things. And I agree with you on those points.
Yeah.
He's just not going to do it. And that's where you're just going to have to accept as a babe for Bernie there, as a babe for Bernie, as your button says, you're not going to get the Bernie Sanders you want. You're going to get the Bernie Sanders who is Bernie Sanders, and you're going to have to live with that. And that's what's really tough for a lot of people to swallow today, because there are those moves that you wish he would have made to avoid these things. So,
Especially now.
With
everybody
he's not going to.
Yeah. And that's the aggravating part, right? I mean, it's not so much that I don't think, look, I think his policies on race and everything else and talking about class is dramatically important. The only thing is the terrain and the political terrain that you're fighting in is not always determined by you.
Yeah.
And in this case, where you have somebody like Biden who's trying to eat up the black vote, then that issue of civil rights becomes an issue of fighting on.
It's always it's interesting, too, and we'll turn to our first break here before we come back with Nicole Roussel, who is in Virginia at polling stations talking to voters as they leave casting their votes, and hopefully we'll get your calls 202-521-1320. The other question, Jamarl, I mean, it's always easy to kind of play Monday morning quarterback a little bit. If he made these other moves, that could have cost him the other moves. I mean, It's like, so it's kind of like the chess thing. Like, I could have gone down this path in series of events, and I could have just lost way earlier. And the fact that he's a 78-year-old Jewish man who's angry, screaming, and ready to, like, bring social democracy to America, that's a huge win. And he had to play a certain kind of chess game to get down that path to where he is now. And so that's kind of the thing. Like, just because you've gone down this one path doesn't mean you can instantly switch back, because you have to go back 45 moves to go back down that other path. So it's not as simple often as people say, just do this thing today.
No, I agree.
And it is going to play out. So we'll do all of the guessing prognostications after this break here. You're listening to Political Misfits live in Washington, D.C. on Radio Sputnik. We're back after this. So, Sean, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No. It's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, I mean, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Welcome back to Political Misfits, the show that goes against the grain. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I am here with my ever-vigilant co-host, Bob Schlehuber, and we're doing a deep dive into Super Tuesday. And I've noted in the monologue, Sanders' enemies have started to circle and flash their teeth as we headed to Super Tuesday voting. Look, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't nervous. We've been talking about this in office today. I'm not the only one. It's a heady mix of nerves, excitement, hopes. It's like an 18-year-old virgin losing their virginity in the red light district in Amsterdam to a woman 30 years your senior. That's exactly what it's like.
And I got ice in the veins over here. I feel great. I'm just chilling.
That's exactly what it's like.
Just chilling. Watching all y'all freak out a little bit. It's got me nervous. I'm more nervous just feeling off of your nervous
my energy. My nervous energy.
It's quite a bit.
Well, look, in real terms, the contours of the race is going to be set tonight by this result. Sanders has to dominate in order to set the narrative. A task made more difficult by the consolidation of the moderates around Biden in juxtaposition with Warren tying up a significant percentage of bitter enders that would otherwise go for Sanders. Later in the show, we'll talk about Super Tuesday predictions. If you'd like to discuss this or something else, call in at 202-521-1320. That's 202-521-1320. But right now, here to assist us in this particular discussion and give us details of what's happening on the ground in the great state of Virginia, my hometown, we're joined by Sputnik analyst Nicole Roussel. Nicole, how goes it?
Oh, it's going great over here, although I'll say it's pretty rainy.
It's hard to hear you. You're outside of the Beltway. For anybody that's outside the Beltway, for me here in D.C., it just sounds like you're so far away, but you're not too far away. You're just in Virginia.
You're just in Virginia, yeah. So what's going on? What's the word on the street in the election? You're there in Virginia. Typically, I would be there casting my vote for Bernie, but I am in Maryland now. And so what's happening in VA?
So I visited 2 different precincts today. One was in South Arlington. Well, these were both in Arlington County, which, as you said, is right outside of D.C., borders D.C. One precinct I went to was in South Arlington, which is a little bit lower income. It's a more heavily Latino area. And then I also went into Roslyn, which is just one metro stop, one subway stop outside of D.C. A little bit, different kind of voters that I was seeing. But overall, there's definitely essentially two camps of people, which is, I think, going to be unsurprising to you all. One group of people who want to stop Donald Trump with using anything, using, whatever candidate they think is best to do that. And the other group of people who are really specifically worried about personally dealing with, know people who are dealing with really, important issues like crushing student debt, like really horrendous access to healthcare, like immigration policies that are really negatively affecting their family members. So those are kind of the 2 different groups of people I've talked to today. The Sanders supporters I've talked to have mostly, I guess, they've all been young except for one older guy I talked to who very briefly just said, I want Sanders because he can beat Trump and he's the only one. But yeah, it's been a bit of a mix, but it's really been interesting to get out and talk to voters.
So let's listen to one of those voters you did talk to. This is a woman who sounds a little bit older about what she is looking to vote for in this election around healthcare and immigration.
The issue that brought me out today is about the healthcare, because I came here as an immigrant, and when I came here, I didn't have healthcare. I have toothache, and I have to suffer through it. And I voted because my grandchildren is coming up today. I may be successful coming here, but I don't know later on what will happen.
And that's an older voter. Let's now play somebody that you talked to quite a bit younger. He was out, this voter you talked to, 18 years old, out here voting in his first election, talking about a similar issue.
So I'm interested in stuff like healthcare. Since I'm getting older, I gotta start worrying about things like that, that's for sure. And immigration, help with my community. It's either between, I voted for Bernie Sanders today, but Joe Biden was also a close second for me. Either one of those 2 I would gladly support.
So I'm curious there, Nicole, that younger voter speaking about healthcare as an important issue, but saying he would be willing to support either of the 2 frontrunners. Big question, obviously, here, too, is where is Mike Bloomberg? Mike Bloomberg is off of the cable news channels today. It's quite remarkable. I don't know if you're seeing Bloomberg voters out there, but talk a little bit more about who you've talked to. It's healthcare, it's immigration, it's beating Trump. Is it Biden? Is it Sanders? Do you get a mix of it? And just for some reference here, those 2 precincts that I think you're at, I believe, at least went quite strongly to Hillary Clinton in 2016, overwhelmingly. Basically, she doubled the vote total for Sanders in the 2 precincts there in Virginia where you're speaking from. So tell us a little bit more. Which candidates are you hearing from? And is it more about issues, or is it simply just let's beat Trump?
So Arlington County is within the broader Northern Virginia area. Virginia is a strange state. It's essentially split into 2 or 3 different pieces, and Northern Virginia is very different from the rest of the state. It's very much Democratic Party establishment for the most part. Actually, the majority, if not all, the precincts that I looked at in Northern Virginia went for Clinton over Sanders in the 2016 primary. So all of the precincts in Arlington County, where I am, definitely went heavily or at least moderately for Hillary over Bernie in 2016. So it's, it's very much an establishment kind of county. It's right outside DC. There's a lot of, in the broader Northern Virginia area, there's a lot of defense contractors. There's a lot of, wealthy people who work in the city who live here. However, in that South Arlington precinct I mentioned that I went to, again, it's not as accessible via transit. It's got some big immigrant communities. It's a little bit lower income. So I talked to a number of immigrants and people of color and younger people in that precinct who, as I mentioned, those were the voters who were really driven by issues. They were driven by health care. They were driven by student debt. They were driven by immigration. Those are the three main issues that I was hearing about today. And in almost all cases, if somebody mentioned or was willing to tell me who they voted for or who they supported, if they were talking about an issue first, they were supporting Sanders. When I got up here to Roslyn, to the just outside of DC area that's got a lot of corporate headquarters located here, the people I was talking to up here in northern Arlington County, this was where I saw a lot of Mike Bloomberg signs. This was where I heard a couple of people say that they didn't tell me who they were voting for, but they felt like beating Donald Trump was the only thing that mattered, and either Biden or Bloomberg or one of the centrists was the only person who could do that. So, it definitely varied a little bit by where I was at. I only heard Bloomberg mentioned once, though. As I mentioned, I did see some signs. But the person I definitely heard about the most today, and that might be because the people who were willing to say who they were voting for were voting for Sanders, but that's definitely the name I heard the most today, and definitely the most excitement was around the issues that Sanders is promoting, and people talked about how healthcare, being able to get an education, that those are things that everybody needs. And so the people who were recognizing that were also pretty excited to vote for Bernie Sanders, and were hoping that he might win in November as well.
Yeah, one other endorsement that Biden was able to get along with Klobuchar, Francis O'Rourke, and Pete Buttigieg was former Virginia Governor Terry McAuliffe. And if you like metaphors, Jamarl, McAuliffe and his team got on an elevator yesterday on their way to a press conference for Joe Biden, and they got stuck on the elevator. It wouldn't move.
Yeah.
So if that's not a metaphor of Joe Biden's presidential campaign, getting stuck in an elevator and not being able to move.
That's funny. Nicole, I was checking out the polling for today with everybody jumping out of the race yesterday. What did people say about that? I mean, ultimately, you've had this consolidation of the moderates. And looking at Morning Consult poll, after Buttigieg and Klobuchar dropped out, Biden up 10, Warren up 3, Bloomberg up 2, meaning effectively all of these other candidates have jumped up in the polls. Biden has reclaimed the lead with 36% in a national Morning Consult poll. So what did the people say about the coalescing of the moderates?
Yeah, I asked a couple of different voters that, and I think in some levels it's kind of inside baseball that you really have to be following pretty closely to be seeing these people drop out and thinking about what that means. But
well, let me ask
Warren
you a different way.
was,
did you come across any Buttigieg supporters or Klobuchar supporters?
I didn't. No, I didn't. I didn't hear those names at all today until I asked people what they thought about them dropping out. One Bernie supporter said she kind of gave this disclaimer where she said, well, I'm sure all the candidates are playing fairly, and, I'm sure no one's doing anything wrong. But she said, I have been really, the massive amount of spending from super PACs has really, has really stood out to me. And that seems like that's something that's not very good. So she did say that. But I will be honest, I was a little bit surprised that that people weren't connecting, or didn't seem as though at least that people were connecting this idea that all of these moderates were dropping out and coming behind Biden as something that maybe, and we don't know, but that maybe the DNC is behind, or that some of the campaigns are behind, because we've watched this before. But again, I think the media isn't reporting on that, and most people are going to work and caring for families and getting to doctor's appointments and trying to deal with their day-to-day lives. So maybe it shouldn't be that surprising.
Yeah, I mean, Joe Biden, it's not only the DNC, but there's a new report. I mean, just the media in general. Joe Biden has received 17 large campaign contributions from executives and vice presidents on Comcast. So if you're watching the news, which a lot of these people watch cable news, I mean, it's VP of Community Interest, Executive VP of Human Resources, Senior General Counsel, Senior Executive VP, VP of External Affairs. So it's not only what they broadcast on the news media, but it's also just who these people are just out in the community. A lot of people know these people. They're very influential with their money, their galas, their country clubs, and that plays into then these establishment type folks getting elected over and over again, and that's Joe Biden to so many of those people. Well, that was Nicole Roussel. She's live in Virginia. You can listen to her all day on all of our programs, giving us live updates all day here on Super Tuesday. Nicole, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Great. We're going to take a quick break here on Political Misfits. We'll be back with your calls, 202-521-1320, 202-521-1320. You're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik live in D.C. We're back after this.
Hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Hi, this is Max Kaiser for Double Down. New show on Sputnik with Max Kaiser and Stacey Herbert. Everybody's doubling down. Central bankers are doubling down. Gambleholics are doubling down. Everyone's doubling down. Why don't you double down? Right here at Sputnik with a new show called Double Down with Max and Stacey. Bye, y'all.
Stuck in traffic? No problem. Stay informed. Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik on 105.5 FM or 1390 AM in the Washington, D.C. area. Need more? Follow us on Facebook or check us out on SputnikNews.com.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, culture without the red and blue treatment. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I am here with Iron Man Bob Schlehuber. We've been discussing the consolidation of the moderates and its effect on the primary going forward. Now, let's be very clear. This effect can't be understated. It's unclear whether this is going to work in getting another candidate to exceed over Sanders. But like I said, when we look at Morning Consult, Biden has regained the lead. So that, in and of itself, is somewhat of a disturbing prospect, but it also shows the effect that Klobuchar and Buttigieg getting out of the race. Biden has taken a 10% jump with 36%, with Sanders falling to 28%. With the moderates coalescing around Biden, we also need to understand the delegate math changes. Sanders was winning twice as many delegates as his next closest rival, Joe Biden. Right now, with everyone getting out of the race, Nate Silver, 538, has shifted the estimate with Sanders to 1738, with Biden to 1363. That is a close margin. It needs to be said that Bloomberg is pulling at 555 and Warren 238. That said, let's get into some prognostication, because ultimately what we're talking about with the moderates consolidating is basically what effect is it going to have on the race in the Super Tuesday states. So, all right, Bob, rapid fire fashion. Let's go to our colony, America Samoa. What you got? America Samoa. Yay or nay? Who's it going to go for?
It's going to go to Sanders.
I think it's going to go to Sanders also. No. I agree. What about Alabama?
That's going to go to Joe Biden.
I think that's going to go to Joe Biden in pretty substantial numbers. What about Arkansas?
That's going to go to Joe Biden.
Yeah, that's interesting. Now, Arkansas, I'm not sure. I'm leaning towards Biden, but it has a large Hispanic population that may actually give competitiveness to Sanders. I'll go with Biden on that one.
Well, let's see. The polls right now, 28. This is where, again, it's like I'm so thrown off by what Bloomberg does. I mean, that's like the other story right now is that these big endorsements going to Biden, if Bloomberg wasn't in the race, it would mean something much more to me, I think. I still don't imagine. I can't imagine somebody the last 2 or 3 weeks trying to figure out who they want to vote for and really just struggling about who to vote for between Mike Bloomberg and Bernie Sanders. If that's been your calculus the last few weeks, like, you got to plug in a little bit earlier and get like more engaged. I can see people struggling between Joe Biden and Mike Bloomberg.
Yeah.
And so now I think that those endorsements last night are offset by Mike Bloomberg getting in the race right now. And the best case scenario is that Warren is simply just flatlined.
Yeah.
And that she doesn't hurt Sanders as much. I think Bloomberg hurts Biden more than Warren hurts Sanders.
I don't know. I mean, I'm looking at the polling in regards to Morning Consult, and based on what Morning Consult is saying, I mean, them getting out of the race created a jump for Joe Biden in these states. I mean, right now, they have a situation where Joe Biden is pulling in 36%. So the question becomes, what does that look like in the various states, though?
Sure, but if you look at Arkansas, Biden 28, Bloomberg 25. These are all polls. They're all super fallible. So just for like momentum. Biden 28, Bloomberg 25, Sanders 17, Warren 10, Buttigieg 8, Klobuchar 7. So if we just did dumb math and we weren't taking these polls very serious, Buttigieg and Klobuchar, that's 15%. That goes to Biden.
Yeah.
So he's at a huge jump then.
Yeah, you got to jump. That's what I
But
mean.
Bloomberg at 25%, that's still, where's
that's
that
a huge
25?
cut.
Where's that 25? If that meant Bloomberg's 25%, say
That's coming out of Biden.
15% goes to Biden or whatever it is, I mean, he would be way ahead. So at least the thing that's holding Sanders, it just had to kind of weather the storm today.
Yeah.
Hopefully he gets out of it and then can, I mean, 33% of the delegates is a huge number, but it's also not 100% of the delegates. And so
Yeah.
you still have as many Joe Biden press conferences as you could possibly wish for, where he just says ridiculous things. You hopefully get a big bump of another endorsement or two for Sanders. I don't know where these endorsements for Sanders come to that have like a big sway like these do.
What's the polling in Arkansas? What's the number again? What is Sanders, Biden, and Bloomberg getting in Arkansas?
Biden 28, Bloomberg 25, Sanders 17. That's this.
Okay. Yeah. So
Swayables, the pollster. Data for Progress has Sanders in second, but he has Biden quite a bit higher there at 36%.
Okay, so Biden may take Arkansas. Fair enough. California, I think that's going to go to Sanders instead.
I think Sanders wins there.
I think
I
he
also think, I mean,
dominates.
that's the other one that interesting, the early vote taking place before these candidates dropped out. Like,
Right,
We got
right.
to figure out a better
That means Buttigieg and but the thing is, they were going to get whipped in California. So I don't necessarily know if it's going to have an outsized influence on the race. What about Colorado? That goes
to
to
Sanders.
Sanders. Yeah, okay. What
Yeah.
about Maine?
Let's say Sanders.
I'll give it to Sanders.
Backyard there.
Massachusetts, Sanders.
Oh.
And I'm going to celebrate when Warren loses in Massachusetts. That is going to be, honestly, I'm at the point now where my celebrations are going to be for Sanders winning and for Warren losing. That's where I'm going to be. So Massachusetts, I'm giving to Sanders.
And it seems like he'll win there. It seems like he'll win there.
Yeah,
Is
I
kind
think
of what
so.
all I'll say.
Which,
on that.
again, if she loses Massachusetts, how do you stay in the race? If you lose your own state, I mean, that looks so bad.
I think she just stays in, though. I mean, if it depends if she can afford it. I guess that's where we don't know the internal numbers here.
Yeah.
Let's take a quick call on Warren, just since we're going to beat up on Warren a little bit. But I'm not sure if she can stay in. But financially, you have to say Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders are good, 7 years older than me. They both have clear they have different type of health issues they're dealing with, and that you just try to stay in and say, hey, if something happens beyond, they get coronavirus or something crazy like that,
not to mention,
just kind of stay in the wings and wait. Because I'm not full bore. I'm not in this like she's part of the establishment's cabal to like stop Sanders. I think she just saw a lane. She clearly had a lane. She was surging at one point. She had something figured out, and then she just self-inflicted wound. Yeah. But I don't think her plan was like, I'm just in this to try to like pull back and hold back Sanders. So we see that slightly differently, but in that sense,
I'm
I
more
think
cynical than you on this one.
That's fine. I mean, it's well-reasoned, so I don't want to take your cynicism away from you, but it seems like she is in it to win it more than in it to just kind of mess with Sanders. So let's take a pause on our predictions real quick and turn to Tyrese, who is called in. Tyrese, thank you for all of the calls as we've gotten off the ground here the last few weeks. We greatly appreciate it. You wanted to get in here on Elizabeth Warren.
Yes, I think I see the strategy like I was telling Lee and Gordon Nixon this morning. Is Oz's Senator Warren want to stay in, and I think she's leveraging her delegates to maybe one day to give them to Sanders, because I think she want to become VP. If Sanders don't agree to it, then she'll go the way with everybody else with Biden. But even though she attacks Sanders every once in a while by gaslighting and whatnot, but she's still, the last debate, like she was like helping him out, like attacking his flank or whatever. So I think she's strategically positioned herself to become the president for Bernie, because Bernie got the popular vote for right now. But if they go to the broker conviction with all the support back in Biden now, Elizabeth Warren would be the one to help out Bernie Sanders. And to me, I don't really like Senator Sanders. So what y'all think about that?
Tyrese, thank you so much for the call.
So let me say this.
From your cynical point of view.
From my cynical point of view.
Cynical purge.
Back in 2016, when Warren had the opportunity, Sanders tried to get her to run. She wouldn't run. And she backed Clinton in that particular race. Now, the catch becomes, why would she back someone who was ideologically further away from her? Well, she would do it because she thought, A, Clinton was going to win, and B, she was going to get some kind of applause or something out of it if Clinton won, meaning either position in the administration itself or look favorably by the party establishment. So I think that's just straightforward. I mean, because otherwise she would have supported the guy who's ideologically closest to her. Not to mention she had the deal based on NBC News showing that them two were working behind the scenes. In this particular election cycle, well, you're at another scenario, right? I mean, ultimately, Warren has no path to win a nomination. She most likely is going to lose her own state. And she explicitly said that her plan was to stop Sanders from reaching the nomination, that the goal was to slow down his momentum to ensure that he doesn't win. Now, you tell me, she said that, yeah.
Where?
When after the last election, the reporting came out that her camp was basically saying we need to slow down Sanders to prevent him from getting the nomination.
So we can get the nomination.
No, to prevent him from getting the nomination on the first ballot, the 1,900 votes.
Yeah. So then in the second or third ballot, she would be potentially able to sneak
broker
in.
convention.
But there's a difference. I guess I'm saying be careful because in the sense of like she's only in it to stop Sanders versus she's in it to win it.
No,
and
but
the
that's
way in
just
which
it.
she wins it is to stop Sanders.
Yes, she's trying to stop Sanders. But that's not how she wins it, though. Nobody in their right mind is going to give Warren the election. I mean, that's like it's a
Do you think the Democratic Party is in
a
a right mind right now, Jamarl?
Yeah, but I don't think they're going to give it to somebody who lost every state and can't win it. Like that gets a little dicey to me. And there's no way Warren is not thinking clearly if she honestly believes that she's going to go into this without winning a state, being broke, not having a broad coalition, getting like 4% of the black vote, and the Democratic Party is going to give it to her.
So then it's Biden. I mean, so I guess the whole the broker convention thing is like, well, who's the Michelle Obama come out of any? It's going to be
Biden.
Okay, so it's just Biden or bust.
I think it's going to be Biden or bust. I mean, but that's why I don't think it's there for her to help Sanders. I mean, ultimately, the number of tally, she said on the debate stage, we keep our delegates until we get to the convention. Why? Because she's going to try to get something out of it politically or some political concessions for her tallies. I mean, she has 200 and something vote totals. Now, whether that's putting her in a position in the administration, whether that's a VP spot, whatever that spot is, she is looking at that as to her political advantage. Now, but that means she has to stop Sanders in order to get that political advantage. That's why I'm in this camp.
But doesn't she have to stop Biden?
Well, I don't think. But see, why would she stop Biden?
Why would she come out today and say Biden's part of the establishment and insider and this isn't who we want? So she's not shying away from that language. And if the calculation is, I'll be critical of them, but without being like too critical. And she hasn't attacked them like she has attacked. I mean, like Social Security, she could have gone in on Joe Biden.
Yes. And she refused to do so.
And bankruptcy.
And she refused
so it
to
is
do
interesting
so.
on some of those broader issues. And that's where Elizabeth Warren really falls off for me, is this whole idea that like everyone's corrupt in Washington, D.C. except the Democratic Party.
Yeah, which is nonsense.
Because she wants to save the Democratic Party. She wants to reform it. She wants to change it. She wants big structural change. But that doesn't come with like saving the Democratic Party. Like the Democratic Party is, can I say trash?
Yeah.
Can I say, I mean, it's just like, it's not a healthy organizing body. I mean, again, I got invited to like a Democratic watch party tonight. You know what I'm doing with my friends tonight? We're working on organizing community events to help people that are low income and being pushed off the streets and can't afford to pay their rent. That's how I'm going to spend my Tuesday afternoon, is organizing that. And here's the Democratic Party again. Michelle Whitty here in our booth giving me a round of applause for the saviorism that I'm doing right now. Michelle, thank you for recognizing my hard work in the community of Washington, D.C. My point being that the Democratic Party, when I hear that from Elizabeth Warren, like the Democratic Party, great organizers, like just we just need to fix them, we just need to energize them. It's like, where are you talking from?
Yeah.
And I think of so many people that are the Sanders supporters she needed to sway over. They just weren't, like, they're too plugged in. A lot of them are, to know that that's just not true. But let's get to Tyler here. Tyler, you wanted to talk about Bernie Sanders. Thank you for calling in. Tyler, you here? Tyler, I'll put you on hold and we'll come right back to you. We have another caller. Diaz?
Yep.
Hey, how you doing today? I say your name right.
Yep, you said my name perfectly right.
Thank you for calling in. Tell us a little bit more. What's on your mind today?
So I'm from Massachusetts, actually, and I wanted to extrapolate on why Warren won't win the state. In Boston, we have a lot of good hospitals here, and we basically understand how healthcare works and how it has basically helped us in our daily lives. Some of the best hospitals in the world is in Boston, basically. And also, if you remember, even if Romney was a Republican, the Obamacare that we have today is based off of the Romney care, which is Massachusetts.
Right.
Healthcare is a big issue in Massachusetts. That's why you see Bernie Sanders' rally was huge, and basically was like 4 miles away. I think it was like 4 miles away from Warren's house. That where
you know what was funny? They were attacking Sanders for having a rally in Massachusetts. Like, how dare he goes into Massachusetts to try to win that state?
Yeah, they'll attack Sanders for doing that, but they won't attack Warren for basically like staying in the race or calling him a misogynist when he wanted her to run in 2015. That sounds even the media tried to run away with it as if it was a Me Too thing, but it wasn't.
Yeah.
Dick Cavett just looked stupid, and it just made Warren look worse in everyone else's eyes. It was, but like to my main point, Massachusetts won't vote for Warren because it's mostly a progressive state, and if you saw the state that Hillary won, it was this one, but it was only because of it's because Hillary had Bill Clinton come here and say total love for Hillary, which wasn't supposed to happen. But more Haley said, that's okay, we'll let it happen, and that's why she won the state. But
thank you,
Abias, thank you for the call. Tyrese just wanted to correct himself. He's not a fan of Elizabeth Warren. He misspoke there and is a fan of Bernie Sanders.
No worries.
So,
What I will
thanks
say,
for the correction there.
Let me say this: back in I think it was 2019, there was a report that came out that Warren was backing Clinton. And back in Clinton, Warren had certain political concessions that she wanted to get from Clinton, that Clinton was worried that she was going to potentially run in the race. All I'm saying is, from the standpoint of looking at the party politics, it does look like that everybody, meaning if she's an ally of the left, if she is working for the benefit of the left, then why over the past several months as she's been attacking Sanders, why was she aping his policies that were somewhat a dishonest way of aping them? She has no path to win a state. She has no path to win a nomination. She stays in accepting money from her super PAC that's keeping her going to lock up that particular vote tally. I honestly believe that if it gets to the point of a brokered convention, which she says is her point in her own press statement at the very bottom, to take the votes to the brokered convention, well, I mean, she's not going to be made president. The only way those votes are going to be used to her best interest is if they use them for somebody else. And again, with the attacks on Sanders, I have a hard time believing she's going to endorse him afterwards. It's possible, but I don't, I mean, some of her people who are been...
Or to endorse him in a moment that matters.
Yeah.
Like she'll endorse him after the fact, obviously.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's just my thought on it. We have additional callers.
Siler, you're on the air. Siler, thank you for your patience. How are you doing today?
Good. Thank you. Good morning, gentlemen.
Morning.
Oh, how you doing? Congratulations on the show. But
thank you, man.
Yeah, I just want to call out the Bernie Bros. Seeing as how I used to be one back in 2016, still cannot believe that you guys are on the Bernie or bust.
Who is?
Bob's
one of us in
That's
the,
only one
the
of
room
us.
is wearing a Babes for Bernie button, and the other one of us is not.
I just started listening to Political Misfits because of Jamal, so I don't know too much about your stand.
I would just say, because other people have asked, I do direct organizing, I do peace building, which uses art as a tool of organizing, and I've gone across the spectrum. My father was a liberal, moderate, right, centrist person who voted Republican, and I was like most people and voted the way in which my father did, and I realized that party was not doing it, and then I started with the Democrats because I thought the Democrats were the alternative to the Republicans and the only ones, and so I started doing more volunteer work, more hands-on work, and I realized that when I went to these meetings and I went to events in my hometown of Rockford, Illinois, which has struggled with all these different issues, we can talk about that city. At another point, I realized that the Democratic Party wasn't interested in hands-on grassroots organizing like I was, and so all of a sudden I was left without a party in the American political landscape, which is quite lonely at times. Yeah. You're a political misfit, and you don't know necessarily where to get your news from or where you can convene or where you find electoral power. And so here in Washington, D.C., I found more of that the more organizing I do. We live in a city, it's just tragic. 29th murder already this year in Washington, D.C., in a city completely run by Democrats who are not addressing the economics, racial inequality, health inequality, all of these different disparities here. And so just because Bernie Sanders, a non-Democrat, is running in the Democratic primary, I'm not about to support him in the Democratic Party. I have a much easier analysis here in Washington, D.C., where I don't have representation in Congress or the Senate. Yeah. I get 3 electoral votes, but when it comes to voting in November, right now, I'll most likely vote for a third party to show that there's alternative people out there that don't want to just simply vote Democrat or Republican. A little easier for me to do that. I voted third party in 2016 as well. I'm in a situation, in a place where I don't have to have the same calculus if I was in a swing state. Maybe talk to me if I was in an Ohio or Pennsylvania, it might be a little bit different. But here in Washington, D.C., I think it's important to show the electoral system that there are other parties and other voices that are left out that don't agree with what the Democrats are doing. And just because Bernie Sanders, if he was to win the Democratic primary, the Democratic Party fundamentally is not going to change anytime soon. Yeah. And so that's why I'm extremely cautious, and I'm in no hurry whatsoever to get behind Bernie Sanders on a Democratic ticket and support him. So that's just kind of where I'm coming. I think a lot of our listeners are also. in that kind of tough situation of where they go right now because they don't trust the Democratic Party. They do hope that it gets burned down to the ground either so it can be rebuilt for something else, or they just hate the Democratic Party, and that's totally okay as well. So that's where I'm coming from, Siler, just to give a little bit more understanding of who we are.
Much appreciated, man, because I wasn't sure where you were on the political spectrum and whatnot. But yeah, you guys are in D.C., so you guys are straight from the swamp.
Pretty much.
And speaking of murders, his name was Seth Rich. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say that on there or not. But regardless, what I wanted to say was why I think Bernie Bros, just to make a case of why they have such cognitive dissonance at this point. There's so many examples, and it seems that every Bernie supporter just overlooks them or just, sweeps it under the rug. One being the DNC lawsuit that happened in 2016. What was it, Nico House, Jeff and Elizabeth Beck? Where was Bernie at to call out the DNC cheating him last time around? That's number one. Since we're already at the California primary again in 2016, Jordan Sheridan, out of all people, a TYT reporter at the time, the Young Turks, for a lot of the listeners who don't know what TYT stands for, he was a reporter for TYT. He was on the ground in the 2016 California primaries last time around and made a video, too, like a 30-minute video about how basically there were some shenanigans going on in the California primaries in 2016, and Bernie, once again, didn't call that out.
So basically, the argument is because first, thank you, Siler. But basically, the argument is because they've cheated him in 2016, it is insane to back him this time around. I think that is a ludicrous proposition. Yes, they did cheat him in 2016. He's just a man, and he's a fallible man. I don't expect him to be anything more than just a person. He has certain weaknesses and certain strengths. Now, you might consider it being a weakness for him not calling it out. And I have to admit, I don't necessarily like the fact that he got cheated or that he didn't necessarily call out the cheating. But by the same token, he is in a political position right now where he could potentially win this nomination. And that is something, you can criticize him. But at the end of the day, if what he's done has got him to the point where he is now, and look, I just had a monologue yelling at Sanders because I thought he was weak on various issues. So this is not one of those things where I support him blindly. I get that he's fallible and everything else. My support here is Bernie or bust. It has nothing to do with the party. If Sanders was running as a Green Party member, I'd be voting Green Party. It's very specific to what it is. In 2016, I voted for Jill Stein. And if Sanders wasn't running, I'd probably do it again. Yeah. So it's not, I am on Team Sanders. I don't think Bob is. Bob is kind of more like amorphous on this stuff.
Pretty apolitical,
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough.
No, I'm joking. Obviously, quite political, along with our callers, 202-521-1320. Stedman, you want to talk about the primaries. Thank you for calling.
Hey, this is Stedman. I live in Detroit. And so, I'm in the sweet state, Michigan. And so,
mess it up on the caller. Let's see if you can call us back for a moment. Yeah, the sound quality.
We do have another caller here. Let's just slide our primaries conversation here with Lori. Lori, thank you for calling in.
Good morning, gentlemen. You Bernie Bros, you.
Well, it's just one, Bernie Bro. How's it going?
Pretty good. It's nice to hear you guys this morning. I enjoy your show a lot.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
As you can tell by my name and my voice, I am a Bernie Bro as well. But I wanted to ask you or tell you something that my sister, she lives in Virginia, and she texted me this morning and a picture of a ballot. I don't know if that's legal or whatever. Everybody's name is on there. All 28 or whatever people.
Wow.
Candidates on the ballot.
That means they didn't have a chance to change it back before everybody.
Everybody
just got up the last minute.
Say you're off the ballot before they can actually change the ballots, obviously.
Interesting. And technically, Buttigieg has suspended his campaign. He hasn't necessarily abandoned it. So I suppose there's a legitimacy to them being on there, even though, no, that's not something we love. There's a few more comments. So Sabrina B, thank you, Sabrina B. Leave a comment next time. Xavier Foster, Judicial Watch is forcing Hillary into court. That is going to have to be a show on its own. Captain N, screw Blue no matter who. DNC, validation, screwing Bernie. Yes, they're trying to. At the very least, they're trying to work together to do so.
Let's try a few calls again here. Stedman, we'll try once more. Stedman, thank you for calling. You're in Michigan.
Hey, yeah. So I've done a little bit of some outreach here locally in Detroit with Elizabeth Warren's campaign. So I met with her staff. We tried to go over some things about her black plan, her black agenda. This kind of piggybacks on yesterday, but even with the primary today and her viability, a lot of her plans for black people, her plans are good. Like Rashad said yesterday, her plans for black people are better than Bernie. She takes more of a race-based approach. But what really boils down to is whether you believe she'll actually do the job. She's losing all credibility with how she's treating Bernie, not hitting Biden on anything, not hitting really anyone else except Bloomberg and Sanders really, on any of the issues, even the things that she could have hit Biden with easily. So a lot of this boils on her credibility, and I think a lot of her supporters have cognitive dissonance because you claim that she's got such great plans and she's so moral, or she's got this. Even her, she tries to say, you need somebody who gets plans in order and who has a body of work to pull from. But she doesn't fight the guy on stage with her who was against most of her plans. She's fighting the guy who's supposed to be her friend.
Yeah.
How do you explain
I hear you, Stedman. I really appreciate it. We have quite a few calls lined up here. We got to get all of you in before our 1 o'clock break. So let's slide in these calls here. We got 30-second comments, hopefully, here from Tim, Danny, and then Kennedy. Tim, what's on your mind?
Thanks for having me on the show.
Welcome.
Thanks for calling.
I just wanted to say, I don't think that the way that Bernie Sanders is going to win this race is by talking more about race. It'd be nice to see him talk to more black outlets and do more black media. But what he has to worry about winning the Rust Belt.
Yes.
States that have to be taken back to take back the White House. Not trying to win Georgia or South Carolina or Texas. It'd be nice if we had those, but we're trying to win the Rust Belt back. And he just needs to stick with trade, go at Biden on his corruption with the credit card companies in Delaware, and he needs to hit him on Social Security. That's how he wins the White House. They're lined up against him. They're going to do everything that they can to take it from him, but we need to be ready when the convention happens in Milwaukee to have our vest and our gas mask ready. They're trying to take it from him.
Yeah.
So.
No, yeah, thank you for the call, Tim. I hear you. I think there are a lot of black voters that Sanders will need to speak to in Detroit and in Michigan and urban areas across the Rust Belt that he'll also have to win. So give us a call tomorrow. We'll talk more about that because I think you'll provide quite a bit of content to get into here. We have Danny on the line now. Danny, thank you for calling in. What's on your mind?
Hey, thanks so much for having me on. Thanks for all the great coverage. It sounds like y'all touched on this a little bit before. About Elizabeth Warren, and I had a conversation with my friend. We're both equally kind of hyped up and anxious about Super Tuesday and what's going to be the end of all of this tonight. Well,
Same here. Yeah, I am ecstatic. I can't speak for everybody else.
Right. Yeah. Well, I'm looking forward to the results, definitely, Jamarl. And but our disagreement was because he was fervently supporting Elizabeth Warren, and I have been a Sanders supporter really since 2016. I never really saw it for Warren. I wanted to because I thought it would be convenient. What do you think now about her moves and her strategy? And do you think there's any chance that she would endorse the senator?
Yep, hang on to that real quick. I do think there's a chance. I want to hear what Kennedy has to say, and then we'll give our final thoughts before our 1 o'clock break. Kennedy, thank you for calling in. You got about 30 seconds here.
Well, thank you guys. Thanks for having me on. I used to love Elizabeth Warren, and now I don't. I just have no faith in her. I think she's an honest actor. I think she's miscalculated very often, and I think she's taking this opportunity and gambling with being kingmaker. I think she wants to use leverage, and I think she wants to wield some power going into Super Tuesday and going further on. She doesn't have any political capital anymore after this. Once she rolls the dice, if she fails, and she will lose all of her progressive benefitos after this. And yeah, it's a shame. I used to love Elizabeth Warren, and now I just can't stomach her. She seems like a charlatan. She is definitely playing a player in the game, as she said herself.
Yeah, Kennedy, thank you so much for the call. Jamarl, I'll just say to answer your question, before the convention, she absolutely does not endorse. After the convention, if Sanders is the nominee, sure. But beforehand, absolutely no way, no how. We're going to turn to a break here. We're going to come back and talk about the latest from Syria, as well as the continued outbreak of the coronavirus in the United States and around the world. And we'll also talk a little bit more about the politics of art towards the end of the hour. Give us a call, 202-521-1320. You're listening to Political Misfits live in Washington, D.C. We're back after this.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I'm Bob Schlehuber here with Jamarl Thomas, a very anxious, nervous Jamarl Thomas.
Very nervous.
Super Tuesday. Well, we're going to take a quick break on the Super Tuesday talk a little bit more about the latest news from Syria, which remains quite scary. If you aren't paying attention, we'll talk with Tom Luongo, a regular guest of ours here on Political Misfits. Give us a call, 202-521-1320, or tweet us at Sputnik Misfits. Jamarl, yesterday, U.S. Secretary of Defense Mark Esper and NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg once again spoke about the fighting in Idlib. Turkey obviously is engaged in combat operations over there, and we will take it one step at a time, Esper told reporters at the Pentagon. He goes on to say, as an alliance, we take this one step at a time so we are prepared for what may happen. Sounds like a horrible way to prepare yourself. Just like one step at a time. It's like, are you thinking through the several different scenarios, different steps? That's how you would be most prepared. Yeah. It's kind of like chess game it out a little bit.
Strategy,
but
not
one
necessarily.
step at a time, day by day, which honestly feels pretty honest. So anyways, last week, NATO had an emergency meeting on Friday on the conflict, which involves, of course, NATO ally Turkey. And Turkey is the big sticking point this current moment. The NATO allies decided to strengthen Ankara's air defenses after a Syrian government strike killed 33 Turkish troops. Then over the weekend, Syria said 2 of its jets were downed by Turkish troops over Idlib, and Turkey has deployed a killer drone swarm to its neighbor.
What is that? I don't know what that is.
Yeah, just I think a lot of drones that can kill people.
Wow.
Kind of what it sounds like. Turkey reportedly shot down another Syrian plane today near the town of Saratkeb, which Turkey had taken but was retaken on Monday by Syrian troops. Russia has since deployed its military police to the town, which is being interpreted as a message to Turkey to back off. This comes before Russian President Vladimir Putin and Turkish President Erdogan are scheduled to meet Thursday. Meanwhile, if that's not scary enough, there's also the wave of refugees that Turkey will no longer hold back. The United Nations said Sunday that at least 13,000 people were massed on Turkey's land border with Greece. Greece later on Sunday announced that it had temporarily stopped processing asylum applications. Of course, all of these migrants are not Syrians. Greece on Friday arrested a group of Afghans for crossing the Greek border illegally, and others were turned back from the country's borders. Astonishingly, we do have a clip here of Joe Biden, of all people, talking about what's really taking place in Syria and the conflict. This is from 2014, before Russiagate poisoned anybody's ability to talk about these issues with any honesty. But here is Joe Biden talking about the largest problem beyond just Turkey, which includes Turkey in Syria, being the United States' own allies.
Our allies in the region were our largest problem in Syria. The Turks were great friends, and I have a great relationship with Erdogan, which I've just spent a lot of time with. The Saudis, the Emiratis, etc. What were they doing? They were so determined to take down Assad and essentially have a proxy Sunni-Shia war. What did they do? They poured hundreds of millions of dollars and thousands of tons of weapons into anyone who would fight.
And Biden goes on to say, who are those anyones? Al-Nusra and Al-Qaeda. So yes, we're funding Al-Qaeda. That's where our money is going. Those are our allies in our name, supporting us in the region and keeping you Americans safe by sending money and bombs to Al-Qaeda. We're joined by Tom Luongo, an independent analyst on politics, culture, and markets at his blog, Gold, Goats, and Guns, to talk about Syria and the high-stakes game Erdogan and others are playing there. Tom, thank you for joining us again.
Good afternoon, guys. How are you?
Good, thank you. Tom, you have a great blog post there on Gold, Goats, and Guns talking about the role of Turkey, of Erdogan, and what's taking place in the region. Tell us a little bit more about your analysis and where listeners should be focusing their attention on as we move forward.
Well, we should absolutely be focused on Thursday's meeting between Putin and Erdogan. That's that's going to be the tail of the tape, as it were.
And it's taking place
I don't know
in
about
Russia,
you guys.
right?
What's that?
That's in Moscow.
Between Turkey and Russia. It's going to happen in Moscow. So when it's happening in Moscow, that means that the Sultan, Erdogan, is being summoned to the Tsar, Putin, to explain himself. if you and I don't mean to mince words here, but that's absolutely what's happening. I don't know about you guys, but I've got the live map of Syria like on constant refresh on my browser as I go through my day to watch the ebb and flow of the front line around the M4 M5 highway and in and around Sarakib and just east of Idlib city, which is going to be the major battle to determine whether or not the Syrian Arab army will be able to repulse the Turks or not. The situation is very fluid, and it comes down to, I think, that at a certain level, I do believe that Putin may have miscalculated here a little bit, and that's a rare thing for me to say because I've been watching Putin now for about 7 years, and I rarely do I ever see him make a substantial miscalculation. But I think he might have after the incident over the weekend where about 36 Turkish troops were killed in a bombing of an Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra, HTS, whatever you want to call them this week because they change their name all the time, convoy in the southern part of Idlib, and there were Turkish troops embedded in that convoy, and the Russians didn't know about it.
Yeah, but that was
and
them
so
backing terrorists. I mean, like in literal terms.
Oh yeah, no,
the
I mean,
Turks were...
Erdogan has been upfront about this that these are his pet Takfiri crazies.
Yeah,
head chopping Salafist crazies, and they are to take over Turkey to take over Idlib. And I firmly believe that from the moment that the Syrian operation began, that Erdogan was promised most of Idlib and a 30-mile buffer zone between the Syrian and between Turkey's southern border and Syria's northern border, so the top 30 kilometers of Syria, in order to effectively break up the two Kurdish cantons, two Kurdish enclaves in Syria. And that's what Erdogan wants, and he also wants most of Idlib. And I think he's been very, well, in his mind, skillfully managing both the United States and Russia to wheedle them to get what he wants, playing both sides against each other at strategic times. And he flip-flops constantly if you've not been watching him. 1 week he's hugging Putin for saving his life, and the next week he's asking Trump for Patriot missile batteries. And 1 week he's defying the United States over the currency, over the lira, saying that he won't take any IMF money, and the next week and buying S-400s from Russia. It goes back and forth, and he's been doing this. But Idlib has always been kind of the thing that he's bargained for in all of his negotiations with Putin. And I firmly believe that when they negotiated the demilitarized zone to kind of ring Idlib in middle of 2018, that he felt that was his moment where he had establish new borders of Turkey. And if you listen to him talk, he literally believes that this area is now Turkey.
That's so bizarre.
And not Syria.
Yeah, that's so bizarre.
Which is insane.
Do you think, so, he's trying to leverage the EU into effectively getting NATO involved in this particular conflict.
Of course.
I mean, basically, I think he's aware that he can't beat the Russian military. And he's fighting them in Syria. And so trying to use this kind of leverage of the refugees, is that going to work? I mean, NATO did have a meeting recently, but is NATO really going to get involved in this particular conflict that is in Syria, not Turkey, in order to push back the troops? I mean, again, they're using this notion of millions of refugees flooding into Europe as somewhat of a club in this case. Is that going to work?
I don't think it's going to work. I think that Erdogan is finally, or Erdogan, depending on, I'm sorry, but I can never get it straight anymore. I think he's overplayed his hand. And I think he's now into desperation mode. Remember, 2-3 years ago, certainly right after the coup attempt, his popularity was still very strong. But he's lost two major regional elections in Turkey in the last 12 months, one in Istanbul and one in Ankara, right? And the latest polling I've seen has his approval rating down in the low 40s. So salt at the taste. It's one poll. But it's been trending in that direction for a long time now. He's got unemployment is rising again. He's demanding the central bank get interest rates down to single digits while inflation is beginning to rise. And none of this now has anything to do with any kind of hybrid war pressure being placed on the lira because he's buying S-400s from the Russians. That was going on like in 2018. He's got real fiscal problems now. They've got $168 billion in Turkish corporate debt, which has to be rolled over in the next 12 months, and they don't have the money. And now he's ticked off everybody who helped him get through the last funding crisis in 2018, which stabilized the lira. And so he's going to Moscow on Thursday to try and cut a deal with Putin to get some of Syria and say, well, just give me something so he can save face at home and stay in power. And I don't think Putin's going to give him anything, because ultimately, at the end of the day, Putin doesn't need Erdogan. He needs Turkey, but he doesn't need him. And I think at this point, everybody's tired of this guy constantly playing everybody against each other. And he finds himself trapped between major powers who are tired of his game. And I don't think it's going to work for him here. And I'm becoming convinced that within a year he's going to be out of power.
Yeah, I'm just kind of
curious.
curious.
Time, no one's going to save him.
I'm curious on what your thoughts about who could possibly help Erdogan. I mean, is Germany, are the Greeks, are they going to get sick enough of the refugee situation? United States has any interest, or is he just out on a limb?
He's out on a limb. Greece is the one that vetoed the NATO statement supporting his actions in Syria, in Idlib, right? There was a meeting of NATO, and the United States put pressure on Stoltenberg and the Germans and the rest of them, and Greece has turned around and vetoed it in a pure rebuke to Donald Trump and to Mike Pompeo. They're like, no, absolutely not. We're not playing games. As a matter of fact, and the other thing I've heard is that in order to prosecute both the Libyan campaign he's got and maintain the buffer zones in eastern Syria and attack in Idlib, that he's pulled all of his armor out of Western Thrace, sorry. And the Greeks are just salivating at the idea of being able to take Western Thrace back from the Turks. I mean, let's not kid ourselves here. There's no love lost between any of these people. The Russians and the Turks have fought 15, 16 times over the last few hundred years, and it looks like they're going to fight again. The bigger problem here, and this is the only out for Erdogan here, is if he does something really crazy, i.e. closes the Bosporus to Russian ships, because he can do that under the Treaty of Montreux, and declare Turkish airspace verboten, or, off limits to Russian planes, who will then have to somehow resupply around Armenia and into northern Iraq, through Iran and into northern Iraq. And I don't think that works for him now. I really don't, because I think that at the end of the day now, the Black Sea is a Russian lake and not really Erdogan's to bargain away. So I think he's trying to play this Article 5, trying to get NATO involved in an Article 5 scenario, while not, while trying to force Putin to give him something. And I don't know that it works.
Basically,
really
the
don't.
leverage of this is him playing both sides against the middle, I suppose. Knowing that he's overextended his military in the various militaristic campaigns, while simultaneously, aggravating pretty much everybody in this process. How should Europe deal with this, though? Because ultimately, right now you have immigrants or refugees amassing on Europeans' borders. You have apparently one person that's recently died in this kind of them trying to push back the boat from coming into Europe. Europe had the problem once before where all of these refugees flooded into Europe after the war in Syria that we were pushing forward with the terrorists and everything else. So Europe politics was literally destabilized by the number of refugees that were flooding into Europe. So meaning they have a clear idea that the refugees create instability within their political space. So what does Europe do about this, though? Because ultimately Erdogan's point is, look, I'm overextended. I need your help. I want NATO to help me out in this process. It allows me more leverage with Russia if NATO is backing me and helping me out with this. But if NATO is not, like you say, he's by himself. And he's aggravated everybody in this process. But what does Europe do to keep those migrants up?
What does Europe do? Ultimately, Greece is taking care of the problem. They're holding him back. Remember also that it's not refugees flooding out of Idlib currently. That's the lie. These are people that Erdogan is busing to the border.
Yeah.
Literally, he's busing these people to the border and blackmailing Europe. And no, Europe should just close the border. Bulgaria's ticked off with him. They're not going to let anybody in. The Greeks, I've seen footage of the Greeks tear gassing people at the border. Like, they're not letting anybody in. The Italians have closed. Now, the bigger question is going to be whether the Italians, under the current the current neoliberal government that ousted Salvini. Remember, they're going to put Matteo Salvini on trial for trying to close the borders of Italy to migrant flow, and now they've got this on their. I mean, I just see that as they may even try and put him in jail, and I can see him winning the next election from jail, right? Funnily enough, if you really stop to look at it, because the poll numbers are moving in his direction, even if Lega's not moving above about 32, 33%. The Brothers of Italy are moving up into the 13% range. So now you've got a center-right, right-wing, vote in Italy nationally that's 45%, which we haven't seen in, oh God, when's the last time you saw 45% right-wing voting in Italy, right? So Merkel's made it abundantly clear that she's not going to stand for this, but I don't know, what does she do? I don't know. The question is whether or not they can hold the border. And if they can't hold the borders into Bulgaria and Greece, it's going to be a mess. And it's going to fuel populism. It's going to fuel right-wing populism all over Europe if they're not careful. So the Europeans don't want this, but at the end of the day, they're not the ones calling the shots here. Because and let's not kid ourselves. You think Donald Trump this is his highest priority right now? We got Super Tuesday, we've got the coronavirus, we've got all these other things that are happening domestically. Trump's focus is not on Syria right now, and I can tell you that he's not happy with Erdogan either.
Yeah, well,
because if he was, he would have done something by now.
Yeah, we have a caller on the line I want to get to here talking about Syria, the latest taking place here. We'll slide Alex in before we do take a break after this comment. Alex, thank you for calling in. You want to talk about the United States and Syria?
Yeah, well, and I was just kind of curious more broadly how these kind of things are affecting, or where the U.S. is in all of this, because it's such an impactful player, I guess you could say, in the Middle East. And, with the growing unpopularity of the occupation of Iraq and the new peace agreements with the Taliban and our drawdown in Afghanistan, I was just kind of curious how it all plays into that. Like, how this is affecting it.
Tom, we have about a minute left here before we need to turn to a break. Go ahead and respond as you wish.
Yeah, well, what I would say is that it's exacerbating those plans, right? It's very obvious that Donald Trump wants to draw down U.S. influence in the region. He wants the regional players, the Saudis and the Qataris and the Emiratis, to take a more active role in how they effectively limit the Shia crescent forming, even though I don't really believe in the Shia crescent. But it's a simple talking point. What I would say is that Erdogan is using that obvious desire on the part of Trump as to leave the region to then re-up his neo-Ottoman dreams. And I think that's going to have to be dealt with first. And I think the guy who has to handle that is Putin. Because Putin ultimately holds the purse strings over Turkey's economy at this point.
Well, you previewed our next section. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back talking about the coronavirus and the crisis of borders around the world as the disease attempts to be contained. We're going to take a quick break here on Political Misfits live in Washington, D.C. on Radio Sputnik. We're back after this.
What's the most important hour of the day? It's the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon. On this show, we don't just deliver the latest headlines, we divide the real from the fake. Tune in to hear from some of the most brilliant political minds of today, get in-depth news and analysis that goes beyond the surface and dig straight into the details. Set your clock to the Critical Hour for a news perspective unlike any of those other guys. Tune in to the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon, weekdays 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern, and catch us on Facebook Live. You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome back to Political Misfits, where we are not afraid to go against the grain. I'm Bob Schlehuber here with my co-host Jamarl Thomas. We've been talking about the situation in Syria, but we have a growing crisis here at home, the coronavirus, COVID-19. That hasn't stuck on, Jamarl, the COVID-19.
Yeah,
people are stuck with coronavirus. Yeah. There's fear that the virus could tip country after country into recession. The G7 finance ministers didn't really announce any specific measures to counter the virus impact on global economies after their call Tuesday morning, but the president of this country here, Donald Trump, tweeted about the Fed cutting rates this morning, and a couple of hours later, the Fed did. I think they saw the world economy forecast for the year was a growth of 2.9%, and I think it's down to now 2.4%. So having ramifications on the economy around the world. The Fed said in their statement that the coronavirus poses evolving risk to economic activity. In light of these risks and in support of achieving its maximum employment and price stability goals, the Federal Open Market Committee decided today to lower the target range for the federal funds rate by a half percentage point. There's a lot of fear about what will happen to the economy, and it seems like they're more concerned there, the Fed, about what will happen to big banks and all of their billions of dollars more than maybe what they care about the everyday people that are sucked up into the economy, Jamarl. Because if they cared about the economy and those participating in it, we wouldn't have the health scare and the health crisis we're in. In 2019, the average annual health insurance premiums were $7,188 for single coverage and $20,000 plus for family coverage, according to a Kaiser Foundation study. That's nearly $600 a month for a single person.
How can you afford that?
How can you afford that?
Yeah.
Now, some, but not all of these
No.
costs will be covered by employers, but that's if you're lucky. Not all employers have to offer coverage, and they certainly don't have to offer great coverage. These average premiums have gone up 4% since 2018. The average premium for family coverage increased by 5%. The average family premium has increased 54% since 2009 and 22% since 2014. Wow. And now coronavirus technically is free, Jamarl. So why did healthcare costs matter? Meaning the actual CDC lab testing for the virus won't cost anything, but as far as we can tell, but as Americans know, you'll be charged for everything else. There's the co-pays, the talking to the doctors, getting your lab results on paper to print them off so you can read them and take them home. All of that, using beds at hospitals, using the equipment, trips to the doctor, can easily run into hundreds of thousands of dollars on words. So if you really care about the economy and the well-being of the economic actors within the markets, you would have addressed healthcare costs long time ago. To talk about the coronavirus, the healthcare market, and the political response thus far, we continue to be joined by Tom Luongo. He's an independent analyst of politics, culture, and the markets. Check out his great blog, Gold, Goats, and Guns. Tom, I know you have another post there on your blog talking about the coronavirus, talking about your thoughts on it. Maybe start us off a little bit more how you're seeing the coronavirus, its spread, the political reaction to it, and what you think the underlying conversations we need to be having around it are.
That's a really good question, and I don't have a good answer. I'm going to be honest with you. For once, I don't have a really strong opinion one way or the other. And the reason is that I've literally heard, I think, every possible variant on every possible story about where this thing came from, what it is, how deadly it is, how deadly it's not. Is it a bioweapon? Is it not? And to be honest with you, I don't think we have enough good data. And what I can tell you is that the reaction to it is both interesting and frightening. Right, it can be frightening because if the reaction from the Chinese and others are real in terms of the virus's severity, then that's scary. And if it's not, if it's an overreaction for political purposes, then that's equally scary for completely different reasons.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so and this is one of those things where we really have to like check our skepticism and our natural tendency to overanalyze situation. What I can tell you is this: I don't fundamentally believe that the Fed cut interest rates this morning because of coronavirus. Okay,
no,
I think that's
interesting.
I think that's a convenient cover story for a scenario that was already degrading before this. I see coronavirus as the straw that breaks the camel's back. Remember, 6 months ago, I don't know if we've talked about this yet, but I know I've talked about it with Garland and Lee on Fault Lines and other places, which is to say that 6 months ago or 5.5 months ago, when the repo market seized up, right? This is a replay of what happened in 2007, 2008, where the first inklings of the 2008 financial crisis started in the repo markets, and then the Fed came in and stabilized. And then 6 months later, Bear Stearns blew up. And then 6 months after that, Lehman Brothers blew up. Okay. And the same timeline is playing out here. And we're right about that 5.5, 6 month mark since the original blowout of SOFR, the secured overnight funding rate, which is the replacement for LIBOR, which caused the Fed to have to come into the repo markets. There's a dollar hoarding wave that's been happening around the world for the last year. Okay. And the last 5 or 6 days of dollar deleveraging aside, the dollar has been slowly but surely grinding higher against the will of every major central planner in the world. Okay. No one wants a rising dollar because the world is unbelievably short dollars because of 10 years worth of zero bound interest rates, because of the dollar became the world's best carry trade, yada, yada, yada. And so part of this response here is the convenient cover story for what's happening. So I look at what's happening with coronavirus and I say to myself, okay, it may be really bad. And I'm not discounting it, and I'm not taking precautions. Weeks ago we already bought 6 months worth of like paper towels, and I got my wife to get her 3 or 4 months worth of medications and whatnot, just preparing, right? Just because I want to be ahead of the panic. And I think that's just prudent, the way people should be thinking about this, and they should be thinking about their personal hygiene and their patterns of behavior and everything. But at the same time, if you're not immunocompromised, the flu doesn't kill you. Like at the end of the day, if this is not much worse than a flu, okay, then what we have to start looking at is, and this is where the healthcare situation comes into effect here in the United States, which is that we have an entire generation, and the flu's been getting deadlier numerically for the last 10 years, right? You guys know this or not, but the flu-related deaths used to be around 15,000 people. Now they're up towards 60. Now, part of that is simply the demographics of the baby boomers getting older, and they're an immense generation in terms of numbers, right? Moreover, a great deal of them and the spiraling healthcare costs come from most of them being immunocompromised from 3 generations of poor diet advice. Most of what we spend money on is complications due to type 2 diabetes and downstream's effect of it. And so that's where it's like this virus is being introduced into the perfect storm of a public health crisis and conversation that we're having, at the same time as our financial system is also reaching debt saturation and having its crisis of faith. Do you see what I'm getting at?
Yeah.
And all of those things heightened together, I think, tip very fragile markets. And this is where I'm going to invoke Nicholas Taleb, saying we've created systems that are fragile as opposed to anti-fragile.
Yeah.
And when the markets are leveraged like this, they collapse very quickly. And then the central planners have no effective response to it, no matter how well-intentioned they are.
So I agree with you.
Or incompetent.
I agree with you. And, it's one of those things where it's like, it's difficult sometimes to find the floor. Ultimately, it's like, yeah, I think it's dangerous, but it's hard to tell what's the politics of it, meaning are they going after China in this kind of castigating way to get across and to denigrate the country, seeing that we're in opposition politically? Or is it really that bad? And it's not the easiest thing in the world to necessarily discern. It's like you're stuck behind your filters and trying to figure out what it is. I also agree with you that if they are using this for political effect, that's terrifying. And if they're not using it for political effect, where they're talking about millions of people dying potentially. I mean, we have a lot of people in this country, like you said, that are older, that may be immunocompromised, there may be people who are ill, and I think it's a perfect storm on a few fronts. You were bringing up the healthcare part, but there's also a mentality part. Meaning if you needed to go to work, you needed your job, you don't have $500 in the bank, are you going to take time off work, or are you going to go to work and infect everybody else? I suspect you're going to go to work and infect everybody else because your first thought is not going to be I have corona or something to that effect. You also have this thing about healthcare, meaning how are you going to pay for the cost of that stuff? Because from my own standpoint, my wife, she was ill at one point and she refused to go to the doctor because of the bill that she received the last time she went to the doctor. She's not atypical on that. And she has insurance. So this is not a situation where somebody doesn't have it. So it's almost like this kind of weird, perfect storm. Also, the other thing, the financial markets. We were tell me if I'm wrong on this, we were dropping in billions into the financial markets when they seized up over the course of the last few months, meaning Trump was attacking the Fed chair and trying to get the Fed chair to cut rates further, but they were also dumping money into the banking system.
Yeah, no, the repo, it's not really the banking system per se. It's really that the banks refuse to lend to each other. And I think that they were worried about things seizing up in Europe. And so the American banks were refusing to lend in the repo markets to European banks, and there was just cross-funding mismatches around the world. And what the Fed does, and that's what the Fed's supposed to do, is to come in and create elastic money in order to keep the short-term interest rates under control. That's its job. That's like its primary job. The regular dual mandate that they talk about politically is nonsense. Like full employment and all that stuff, price stability, that's nonsense. Their job is to ensure that the banking system remains liquid and they can pay their bills on Tuesday while they're waiting for their funding to come in on Friday. Right? That's what the Fed's supposed to be doing. So I'm not. But when they have to do that, and the banks won't lend to each other, then the Fed's supposed to step in and help that situation out. They did, and they've been doing that now significantly and consistently for the last 6 months, and they've been monetizing an incredible amount of short-term debt as well. Because remember, we're running a huge budget deficit. So all of these things are playing in at the same time. I can tell you that, for example, you guys quoted insurance rates earlier. I don't have insurance. I use a small concierge service here locally that I'm lucky to have. I don't have insurance. I'm not going to pay. I'm not paying 20 grand for my family. I'm just not doing it. It makes no sense to me. Better to to live healthy as best as possible and stay away from it as best as possible. And that's what my wife does, is tries to figure out how we can live healthily so that we don't have to spend that kind of money. It's insane.
Yeah, no, I've heard that argument before. Insane. An interesting strategy. I do just want to say here around if it's being politicized or not, the New York Times is surely doing everything it can to politicize the coronavirus. First, it blamed China for not doing enough out of the gate, and then China does a shutdown, and they say, oh, how dare they quarantine people. And now the New York Times article lately, China stopped its economy to tackle coronavirus. Now the world suffers.
What?
So it's like, what do you want, New York Times?
And tomorrow they're going to blame Trump for not doing enough. I mean, it's comical at this point. And American media is off the charts loony, and they just don't care.
Yeah, we're not going to get to the story.
I stopped listening to them ages ago.
One person not with us in the mainstream media anymore is the good old Chris Matthews threw us a curveball, if I could say, there on Hardball last night, resigning. But we'll talk more about the crazy media tomorrow. We're going to switch back into our Politics of Art segment after this break. Tom Luongo, Gold, Goats, and Guns, thank you so much for joining us.
I appreciate the invite, guys. You take care. Have a great week.
Great. We listen to Political Misfits live in Washington, D.C. We're back after this.
Breaking news, expert analysis, and exclusive stories, all in one place. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold. We are talking
24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
You are listening.
We give you the most essential out of the endless information space.
Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Shooting from the lip.
We're taking no prisoners here. Real opinions for real people.
Where we bring you people with controversial views, and instead of trying to catch them out,
We actually let them expand on their views.
What's going on in British politics, European politics, and indeed in world politics as well. And wherever you are, whether you're a UKIP supporter, a Tory or Labour, everything is in turmoil.
John Gaunt.
Shooting from the lip.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik. That music means it's time for our weekly Tuesday segment, Politics in Art. Today we're talking about the intersection of art and movements, the imagination or lack thereof in the American political system, and an incredible theater production piece here in D.C. called This Bitter Earth, which is running now through March 22nd at Theater Alliance. Here to join us for that conversation is the wokest of the woke. Raymond Caldwell, producing artistic director at Theater Alliance. Raymond, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And obviously, I'm being a little facetious there with the usage of woke here in the DC and the art scene. Apparently, if you're just woke, that means all of a sudden you create good, meaningful art.
Right.
But just because you have a good hashtag and use the phrase "I'm woke" doesn't necessarily mean you produce high quality, hard punching art. Raymond, thanks for joining us. How's it going?
Oh, it's going so well. Thank you. That's a great segue into our conversation.
There we go. Yeah, super Tuesday, talking about arts and politics. And to connect that, I want to start maybe at a 30,000-foot view here of arts in the current American political landscape. 202-521-1320. If you want to get in on this conversation. And for me right now, so much of the battle in the American psyche is what is possible and what is not possible. And so many people, at least my breakdown, has Bernie Sanders as the guy that's unrealistic, these big ideas. There's no way we can have any of these things. And you vote for Joe Biden if you want pragmatism, get stuff done, the kind of status quo of what's already been done. It just feels like this lack of imagination to its core, and that's what's really put there. Can you imagine something different that's better for you, or do you want to just imagine what is and go back to kind of what is safe to you? And two things I remember so much that speak to this point is that early debate when Elizabeth Warren just laid into John Delaney, when John Delaney's like, we can't pay for that. How are you going to pay for that? How can we have that idea? Blah, blah, blah. And Elizabeth Warren's like, what is the point of running for president if you're not going to have the bigger idea, or you're not going to have something that's bold and creative and different? And then the second kind of idea that I think a lot about is when I was in Iowa for the Iowa caucus, and I can't tell you how many people I talked to, and it's like heartbreaking because people have been conditioned into not fighting for what they want. And so many people said, you know, I want healthcare, I want college debt forgiven, I want free college, I want the end of wars, but we can't have that stuff. And people have completely kind of collapsed down on what they think is possible. And I'm curious from you, somebody that's in the arts, somebody that follows arts both here in the United States and around the world, of how much of our political imagination has just been crushed and destroyed. And for me, it links to going back to elementary schools and just the cut of funding for arts programs. It comes to somehow once you turn a certain age as an adult, you're no longer supposed to be creative or color or do arts in your spare time. And all of that adds up into a society that's now telling us somehow that Joe Biden, this kind of guy that's just kind of done the thing,
right?
Old white man without any bold proposals, just kind of we'll go back 4 years to the good old Obama days. Tell me a little bit more how you see that and how the pieces that are produced in theater and music and movies, all of that, all intertwine into our day-to-day politics.
Yeah, you know, I think that's a really, really great segue into this conversation because there is totally a parallel happening there. There is a lack of creativity or almost imagination, and that's happening culturally. We see that happening culturally. I think we see that playing out directly in our politics, right? Yeah. This idea that we can't imagine a space or a world in which the things that we want, we can actually have. And, you know, I think the beautiful thing about arts and art spaces is that's what those spaces are supposed to do. They are actually supposed to teach us to imagine worlds and spaces that we couldn't even fathom. But I think that what's happening right now is just that fear right now, that need for moderation. And I think that space of moderation actually is a really dangerous place. This idea that we should take the safe choice. And we're seeing a parallel in that in the arts as well. We have a number of major regional theaters throughout the country that are producing what I would call very safe, moderate choices. Those choices that are going to speak to the middle. But what we're not talking about are the people who exist actually on the fringes, the people who have not been invited to these cultural spaces, and the ideas and stories that actually speak to them. And so I think that this place of moderation actually is dangerous. And we can learn a lot in art spaces and from art spaces about how to move past this idea of moderation or safety or perceived safety.
I agree. I mean, ultimately, you're mentioning spaces and so forth. Art, that's his point. Excuse me, I'm sorry. That's his point. This notion of getting people outside of their typical context and seeing things in a third-person perspective. For example, Star Trek. Star Trek is a great example.
Which I love.
Right. I mean, basically, you've had expansive humanism. This was going back in, the 60s and 70s, where African-Americans were second-class citizens. You had women who were second-class citizens. You had us being in this Cold War with the Russians. And on the bridge of the ship, you had a black woman. The first kiss between a white man and a black woman was Captain Kirk and Uhura. And you had a Russian on the bridge. Like, you had this cornucopia of people on the ship with this notion of expansive humanism. And that was at a time where that was not the reality of the situation. Mm-hmm. And you think of all the people who grew up watching that. You think of all the people who grew up wanting to be scientists because of that. And people who could take themselves out of their typical context and look at the world in these grand, broad terms of getting rid of poverty and hunger and all of these things. Art is an amazing thing for that. I think this is kind of goes back to why religion is so fundamental in getting people to push past their current situation, because it allows them to look beyond their current situation. And art, in very real terms, does exactly the same thing. Mm-hmm. That's what I think. And even politically, by the way. I mean, this notion of the moderates lost. Clinton lost. Gore lost. Kerry lost. All these people lost.
But, I want to play this clip here just because so much of those losses can come, but nothing can change as long as the moderate or the white man or the corporation still has control of those levers and things. And so we were talking about just before the break, Chris Matthews resigning last night on Hardball. And I want to just play this clip of part of his kind of exit, a 2-minute exit, just seemingly nobody was
just
prepared
out the blue,
for it.
right?
Out of the blue. So we play this clip because I think this clip kind of speaks to what we're saying right here. Here's Chris Matthews last night.
Well, after conversation with MSNBC, I decided tonight will be my last hardball. So let me tell you why.
You didn't decide.
The younger generations out there are ready to take the reins. We see them in politics, in the media, in fighting for their causes. They are improving the workplace. We're talking here about better standards than we grew up with, fair standards. A lot of it has to do with how we talk to each other. Compliments on a woman's appearance that some men, including me, might have once incorrectly thought were okay. We're never okay. Not then and certainly not today. And for making such comments in the past, I'm sorry.
Chris, you got fired. You got fired.
Yeah, you got fired.
You got
Right,
fired.
right.
There's no white man with a primetime cable news channel.
Just gonna give it up.
Nobody's gonna give that up. And that's the
Right.
point, right? It's like all these people of the Joe Bidens of the world, and it doesn't work well with Bernie Sanders because they're both like the same age.
Right.
This whole idea of like
but yeah.
ever, nobody just steps away and says, you know what, that is right. And that's what drives me nuts about this. Like, oh, we care about younger generations. If you care about younger generations, then they're overwhelmingly behind Bernie Sanders at this point. So if you care about younger generations, then say, you know what, I'm going to hold my nose, I'm going to swallow, I'm going to vote for Sanders. But at the end of the day, the entrenched interests stay in those positions of power, and they're not about to step aside to all of a sudden let other people come in and dictate what's going to happen because they want their front row theater tickets. They want to be acknowledged at the gala for the theater every year. All of that stuff, the perks that come with power. And people aren't going to give that up just to all of a sudden be realistically like woke, right? Like they're not going to all of a sudden just kind of change course. It takes them getting fired or called out like Chris Matthews to change anything. And that for me is the great battle beyond just politics, but for the culture, for the soul of this country. Joe Biden, there you go. But that's like, how do you fight for that? And that's a bigger conversation. That's why I think with our politics here on Political Misfits is we're trying to talk beyond just kind of this like left, right, Democrat or Republican. There's so much more in our communities around religion, around race, just what industries people work in. All of that is being battled for where that goes. And I think it's so much bigger than just kind of this left, right, blue, red spectrum that we're on.
Mm-hmm. And I find, I think Chris brings up a really important idea entrenched in all of that, young people. Yeah. And I think that young people are not willing or do not want the moderate. They do not want the safe choices. And I think that this is a direct clash of that boomer generation, you know. How are we now, a younger generation, moving into these spaces and taking them over and making the shifts and changes that we see, that we want enacted?
One of the hardest things is getting people to realize that there is no point to your society. None. You choose. And in making those choices, this notion of, oh, we can't have nice things, that's not entirely true. That's a certain degree of propaganda that people swallowed. I mean, this notion of having health care, education, Social Security, all of those things are absolutely possible, but it takes a certain degree of imagination in order to make that work. And one of the biggest hurdles I think that Sanders had was getting people to the point of saying, oh, wait, we can do this. It's the richest country on the planet. We can do this. The Chris Matthews clip, one of the funniest parts of that is he's like, basically, I've had a conversation with management, and apparently women don't like you when you're saying, hey, I'm not going to say anything lewd, but you get my point. He's basically saying, I can't say lewd stuff to women, and they'd be okay with that.
It's like, why
He's like, I didn't know that. Times have changed. The young people are not for me, going after them in some kind of sexist way now. So I'm just going to leave my job. We agreed mutually for me to, whatever. You got fired.
So there's a question in here from a super fan here on the Progressive Soapbox YouTube page. It says Bernie wants to cut $50 billion a year from the military-industrial complex to help pay for Medicare for all. That's not much of a greater imagination to me. And I think that's a good point. At the same time, there's an article. Whenever anybody says Sanders is too radical, too leftist, I send this piece from The Intercept, which basically says Warren, Sanders, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez are the true centrists.
Yes.
And if you think of that in Washington, D.C. theater, just to kind of speak to our conversation right now, is all of these people think they're like these liberal Democrats, cutting edge, we're forward thinking, but then you actually go and see how that expresses itself in the theater and the art across town, and like very little. And Theater Alliance is one of the only theater companies that actually try to push boundaries or think beyond of what is, again, within our kind of our bubble. And so much of the political conversation has been shifted to the right that all of a sudden when you offer like centrist art, people are like, oh my God, this is cutting edge.
That's so right.
So I'm curious how you battle that with Theater Alliance, somebody that does look to try to kind of push some of the conversations forward and it seems like you only can push them so far as audiences are willing to go. And that's that other great battle. So people say, like, let's take it on, let's confront it. But then you go and confront it or take them where that is, and they're like, oh, no, actually, no, we're good.
Yeah, I think that a number of theater companies right now are trying to balance out, how do I program for the center of my audience? How am I programming for the boomers who are still going to the theater? And that's a very interesting place to be in. I find that often that space is safe and those choices are safe. It gives audiences an opportunity to pat themselves on the back and say things like, racism is wrong. And then they leave these spaces really feeling like they've changed the conversation.
Feeling better about themselves. Yeah.
For sure.
It's like recycling.
Right.
It's like, I threw this can away. I feel great. I feel great. And it's like, yeah, that's nice, but that's not really touching the issue.
Right. And I think that what we're looking to do at Theater Alliance specifically is actually program conversations that aren't easy, that don't point out one bad guy or one good guy, but instead actually ask us how we're all doing wrong. And how are we all working better in this space? All of our performances are followed by post-show conversations with our audience so that we can actually leave that space with tangible action items. What is it that we're going to do once we leave this space? And then past that, I find myself not programming for boomers. I find myself actually programming for my community. And I think that that's really essential because that was the goal of the regional theater, to respond to the needs of its community directly. And I find right now that in the regional theater, because there is not enough funding, because everyone is fighting for the same funding and the same audience, we're all programming the same things, the same safe choices.
You're not fighting for that Bloomberg money? I heard there's unlimited amounts of that.
There's a lot of money out there.
Go to BloombergGrants.com.
This put me in mind of James Baldwin when they were criticizing him for some book that he did. He was like, well, I didn't write this book for you. I wrote it for my audience, my community, So yeah, it sounds very similar. Look, I am not one of those people that like safe content per se. I mean, after a while, that gets kind of boring. And I do think the conversations, or the very least the more interesting conversations, are on the edges, on the margins. Sure. Those are the things where people are yanking and pulling society to a certain point of view, whether that's the Harlem Renaissance with civil rights, whether that's with Will and Grace, or, with gay rights. Even if you want to go to this workers' rights, a little bit different because it's not necessarily an identity thing. But it's pushing this envelope and pushing this edge on what's possible, what can be. And art gives you this way of looking at it. Like, perfect example, Star Trek. Another Star Trek reference. On Voyager, my wife hates Voyager, but Janeway, they come across this planet of people who are living in water. The entire planet is a water planet. And Janeway is like, look, we can't take over. You guys are messing up. You guys are destroying your own habitable space. You know it as a flat fact, destroying your own world. And they were like, well, look, we've been here forever. How dare you tell us what we should do with our own planet? But by the same token, you're destroying your planet. And now anybody who's watching that will say, God, those people are stupid. And then you's like, what? You're doing the same thing. Now, art allows you to look at that and be like, wow, that's horrible. I mean, they're destroying their world. Hey, maybe we're doing, you know what I mean? It's that juxtaposition that allows you in a weird way to be safe, but at the same token, to be able to indulge with stuff. Battlestar Galactica, another good one, where they started doing suicide bombings in order to push back against the machines. Now, if you're in America, and this was maybe 10 years ago, they're doing suicide bombings on film. You're talking about edgy, and doing them in a way of saying, this is our way of pushing back against an enemy that is that we can't necessarily beat, that's intractable. The only thing we have to do is give our bodies for this particular cause. Now, this is taking place in America. People have these suicide bombings that were taking place in the Middle East, and this edginess in regards to art forcing you to take the position of, I understand it. That's uncomfortable. That's extremely uncomfortable to take that position of, all right, I get why these people are doing the suicide bombings. When you know consciously that in your own reality that people are doing the same thing in regards to pushing back you and the aggression that your country is doing. I'm a sucker for art on this stuff because I agree with you.
And what I as a art maker now, as a producer of a theater company, what I'm really grappling with is a culture that no longer centers theater or the performing arts. How do we, performing arts institution, compete with film, television, movies, Netflix, Hulu? how do we compete with that? And I think that, at Theater Alliance, what we believe is that it's actually the personal connection. We need to be in the room experiencing this story together to then have a conversation about it. And when I think about arts and arts training and arts programming that's happening throughout the country, we always know that arts are the first place for cuts. And I think that's incredibly dangerous, because what happens in that is that we are teaching a younger generation not to be able to have a soft skill like empathy, right? We learn empathy through art, and we learn conversation skills through art. And so as these programs, as this arts education begins to dwindle from our schools, we are seeing it firsthand at the regional theater level. And that's really scary.
Yeah, when we talk about conditioning populations, it's much easier to condition a population into certain beliefs if they are unable to create or think beyond what they're basically being told, and they can't start playing with different ideas and say, wait a second, and question it properly. I wanted to talk a little bit about This Bitter Earth, the production now running at Theater Alliance now through March 22nd. I chuckled last night because I saw a tweet from Sean King, Bernie surrogate, social justice journalist, whatever you want to call him. And he basically said, I'm talking to so many Beto O'Rourke supporters, and they were so disappointed that he supported Joe Biden. And this is where you get problems with trust fund babies all of a sudden being the advocates for social justice and race issues. And this is kind of what you confront in many ways in This Bitter Earth. You have two main characters, a two-person play, the incredible Justin Weeks and the other actor,
Noah Schaefer,
in the play together, two gay men. Justin, black character, along with then his boyfriend Noah, who plays a white character, and a trust fund baby who gets into social movement work, gets into the Black Lives Matter organizing protest, and his black boyfriend just doesn't want to show up in that kind of way, go to the protests and movements, and basically struggles and says, look, I'm living this life that you're out there protesting and fighting for. You need to actually listen and kind of center yourself around me. This isn't about you going to the protest, but it's about the issue and cause. And I think we see that so often in these like liberal white person spaces, that like they're the voice on racial justice. They're going to be out there on the front lines, and they don't realize that black people have been dealing with this for 400 years in this country, and so often want to have a voice over the pains of other people. So tell us a little bit more about This Bitter Earth, why you guys chose this piece, and how it speaks to the current political moment.
Yeah, I really love This Bitter Earth, and what Harrison David Rivers has done in this production is he's actually painted a really complicated backdrop, a conversation that not many people actually are privy to. I continue to say at all of our post-show conversations, we actually exist and live in the most segregated times, and our segregation at this moment in time is chosen. So people who actually get the opportunity to live these interracial lives because of their relationships actually get to have very nuanced conversations about race. And actually, that's what this play tracks. It tracks some really, really pivotal, nuanced conversations about race, the intersection of homosexuality and race, and what our role is as activists. It's interesting to think about the black character, and I think I was drawn to this play because I think oftentimes when we think about the Black Lives Matter movement, we think about black people as a monolith, and we think about black people as all co-signing to the Black Lives Matter movement. And actually what we see in This Bitter Earth is a young black activist who's an artist, who is an activist in his own right. And using his art for his activism, as opposed to being on the front lines of BLM.
It doesn't have to be the same for everybody.
Right, and so I think that what we're inviting conversation too in this piece is also the idea that activism happens in any number of ways. And this trust fund baby who is white and has all of this privilege actually learns the most about his allyship and most about his activism as a byproduct of his relationship with this black man.
And that does make sense. I mean, if you like, it's one thing for somebody to be objectively looking outside of something that they're not necessarily part of. It's another thing to being in a foxhole with this other individual that has this kind of different, let's call it life experience in regards to the way they're living. So you're saying, Bob, you don't like the idea of 5 people, 5 whites on a panel talking about blacks? We need to avoid that. Have you seen, like, on MSNBC, they'll have, like, 4 or 5 people, and it was like, all right, let's talk about the Russians, or let's talk about the blacks.
Pete Buttigieg at the last debate goes, I just want to acknowledge that there are no people of color up on the stage, and I want to be the one that speaks up for these issues. So I was just like, what? How are you this person? I'm curious, as we mentioned the Black Lives Matter movement, it's moved and transformed in many ways, which I think is incredibly fascinating to watch movements coalesce, to build. Then there's internal fighting. There's a shift then to policy, electoral policy. They did have themselves known the other day. They shut down Amy Klobuchar's speech in Minneapolis. I don't know if you saw that for an hour. They took the stage. Got shadowed by her dropping out and then endorsing Biden. But there is that movement that is there. And I think that voice will really, if Bernie Sanders is stopped from being the nomination, and if it happens at the convention in Milwaukee, I think that voice is going to rise back up. Raymond, I know you love predictions. We were halfway through the list. We were halfway through our list, and I think I'm 100% accurate so far with all of my predictions here. We stopped in we were in Massachusetts before we were moving on alphabetically.
Now I picked Sanders in Massachusetts.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, we got. I'm going to take Massachusetts. You got me too excited for Sanders going into South Carolina. I got bit by you last time, Jamarl.
Well,
so
I did say the polling turned against him.
You didn't say he was going to win outright.
I had a spark in me that believed he could win. I mean,
okay, but Massachusetts we feel more confident than South Carolina, and I think that's fine. Minnesota is the next alphabetically. Ilhan Omar, the congresswoman there, had a huge rally last night. Minnesota.
That's Klobuchar state, right?
That is Klobuchar state.
I'm worried that that's going to go to Biden. I'm not worried. That would show some type of.
You're allowed to lean here. I want to see the
I think Sanders
here.
is going to take it. I mean, Klobuchar was actually leading in that state, and if she's no longer running, then the question becomes.
And where does it break? So she was at swayable. I don't know, swayable using the polls here. Sanders up 6 over Klobuchar, and that's where the thing is. It's like just because Klobuchar endorses Biden, it doesn't mean all of those votes go to Biden.
No,
and I think a lot of people would have been with Joe Biden. I was saying that to you yesterday. Joe Biden's a known person. He's been around forever. He was the vice president. If people were going to be with Joe Biden, they would have been with Joe Biden by now. I think some will turn to the moderate voice or vote or whatever. But again, if you're looking at electability, you've been paying attention. That was probably one of the reasons you weren't around Joe Biden from the get. There's a reason you didn't go to him in the first place. Is Klobuchar dropping out the person you now turn to? I'm not sure. North Carolina is up here.
Sanders. Now the thing is though,
Sam's done. Next.
I think it's
next.
Well, the catch
Texas
is,
next.
I think it's belied by the polling though. I mean, with Klobuchar and Pete dropping out, Biden gained 10 points, like literally overnight. That is astonishing. Even Warren went up, meaning so Pete, a portion of her vote went to Pete, a portion of Klobuchar and Pete's vote went to so forth. Like it's, it is having some level of an effect. The question becomes, is that enough of an effect in the various states? Because momentum will make a big difference. I think Sanders is going to take North Carolina personally, even though I think it's a toss-up.
The second home state here for Elizabeth Warren, her birth home,
North
Oklahoma.
Carolina? Oh, Oklahoma.
What were you going to say?
I hope it goes to her. It's her home state. I hope her folks come out.
Well, her home state is Massachusetts.
Her home. She grew up in Oklahoma, so obviously Massachusetts, where she's a senator, not looking that great for her. Oklahoma, I don't think is going to go to her. I think Biden wins Oklahoma.
I don't know the polling in Oklahoma.
It looks good for Biden. I'm taking the safe bets right now.
I'll give it to Biden on this. I'll give it to Biden.
All right. So we got a few left here, a few minutes left. Tennessee, Texas, Utah, Vermont, and Virginia.
All right. Virginia, I think, is going to go to Sanders. Texas, I think, is going to go to Sanders. In fact,
you really think Texas is going to go to Sanders?
Because he has a massive Hispanic population that he's been bringing to the polling. And in whether that's in Nevada, I mean, he's winning number like 20 points, like over everybody else. He had like 50-something% of the Hispanic population voting for him in Nevada. And the same thing is going to take true in California.
You know, that Robert Francis O'Rourke
Beto, the one who's the white guy pretending to be Hispanic, Beto. But from the standpoint of Texas, what's his name? Roca, Sanders' secret weapon, is kind of making a point we're going to win Texas. So they're pretty confident about this notion of them winning Texas, and he's been ahead in multiple polls in Texas. So even though I don't think it's going to be a blowout, I do think he's going to win it. Same thing with North Carolina, same thing with Virginia. I don't think they're going to be blowouts. I just think he's going to barely make it over the finish line in regards to a win.
So you're putting Texas in the Biden camp.
Yeah, because I'm thinking of my family in Dallas. I'm thinking of the moderates that I know in Texas and where the safe choice that they'll want to go with.
Well, we're going to have all of the results tomorrow. Check out the Progressive Soapbox. I'm assuming you go live tonight. What time are you going to go up?
Oh, man. I guess whatever the polling start, whenever the first location stop.
Yeah,
so
it's pretty early, 7, 8 o'clock. Yeah, you'll be there all night. Check out the Progressive Soapbox. We'll be back with a brand new show tomorrow on Political Misfits. Jamarl Thomas is excited.
One thing before we finish, do you think the peace deal with Afghanistan is our first surrender?
No, it hasn't happened yet until the troops have left, and I still think we'll claim victory on the way out. Big thank you to Raymond Caldwell, Tom Luongo, Nicole Roussel, and all of our callers. Thank you for listening. Now get back to organizing.